IVM.
We would like to thank Storytel for sponsoring this show. Storytel is an audiobook platform that lets you hear hundreds of thousands of stories on your mobile PC wherever you prefer. Generally, Storytel is a great deal at 299 rupees a month. But that's not good enough for IVM listeners. We want something more. So for our listeners, if you go to storytel.com/IVM, you can get your first month for just 99 bucks. That's $200 off. That's a crazy deal. Go, take advantage. This week, I'm going to recommend a modern classic, something that many of you have seen, many of you have heard of, but few have read or listened to. That's Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. The entire series is available on Storytel. The story is based loosely on the War of the Roses succession fight that happened in 15th century England. And when you hear Roy Dotrice, the narrator, really bring this out, his voice tonality is so on point for the kind of historical tone that they're trying to strike. You'd really lose yourself in it. So do definitely check that out at storytel.com/IVM and go get the Game of Thrones book. You'll enjoy it. That's storytel.com/IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. Today, I'm hoping to touch upon a topic that I've never really grappled with on this podcast. Why are our cities such a mess is the question we want to ask today. And the short answer seems to be politics. We pay a lot of attention to our general elections and our state elections. We seem to treat them like festivals. But what about our municipal elections? I'm joined today by someone who knows a thing or two about the subject. Suman Joshi is Program Manager of Takstashila's Graduate Certificate in Public Policy. And she really understands these urban issues better than any of us, certainly much better than me. I'm also joined by Atish Padhy. Atish handles, among many other things, our digital properties. Now, obviously, getting to urban governance, it does tie, this issue does tie into broader questions about our role as citizens, and as well as the very nature of politics in India, the legitimacy of protests. So let's dive right in. Suman, welcome to All Things Policy. This is your very first time on the podcast, right?
Yes. Thank you, Aditya. Thank you, Atish. It's something that I'm doing for the first time. I'm quite excited about it.
Great. And we'll hope to have you here much more often now. Now, you recently wrote an op-ed about the need for what you called active citizenship, especially in cities. We'll get to active citizenship in a bit, but I first want to start with some context. You start your op-ed by mentioning the recent municipal elections in Hyderabad, right? And you make the case that, among other things, obviously that election was fairly free of any substantive issues. And you make the case that citizens are reacting to the failures of local government by sort of withdrawing into their own private enclaves. They're taking matters into their own hands, and they're developing their own private solutions there. Can you give us some instances of this? For example, in the very city in which we are today, Bangalore. And why are citizens choosing these private solutions instead of engaging government?
So the entire inspiration or the thought process began with a few years ago, actually, with how the elections, etc., are taken. So we take our general elections very seriously. The seriousness reduces with the state elections. And by the time we come down to our municipal elections, nobody even knows that it has happened or it is due. And not anybody from our circles, like people like us, give a damn about these elections, right? So, but when you look at actual service delivery, when we look at actual delivery of all the amenities or anything that the state needs to do, it is the local government. So we really need to take those elections seriously because that is what defines how we live around here. So the reason for this, as I have read for the past few months, seems to be that as we rise in our economic levels or income levels, we seem to lose faith in the state, right? So the minute we can see an exit out of making a claim on the state, we take that route out. So even in my op-ed, I've been talking about, the exit. You can either exit or you voice your protest, as the economist Albert Hirschman has said. So the minute you are able to exit, we are exiting. That's what all of us have done, right? So if you look at all our communities, that are gated communities that we live in, the instances of private solutions abound aplenty. You look at water, you look at security, you look at electricity. All of them are public, goods that or amenities that the state has a role to play. Now, we can debate on the private good, common good, that part of it, but it does not absolve the state of making these amenities available to the citizens. But what we see is, since the state has abdicated in some sense, what we have seen is that we have found private solutions. So if the piped water is something that the state should be providing. Now the state is not provided that, so what do we have? We have water tankers, we have tanker mafias, and we have all these other associated things, governance issues around that. Similarly, electricity. Look at electricity. You don't have regular supply of electricity. So we have the gensets, we have DGs, we have whatever else that comes along with it, and the governance failures around that. Right? Now, if you look at, of course, education, health, security is something that the state should provide. That is the primary purpose of the state, right? Like, it has monopoly over violence, and therefore everybody needs to feel safe. But look at all our, our residential societies. We pay extra for security around there. We do all of this. So all these are actually private solutions that we have found because we do not rely on the state. And why do we not rely on the state? Comes down to what Lance Pichette or Devish Kapoor in their papers have spoken about, the flailing state. While the state can do one-off elections, one-off events well, but the regular, ubiquitous, functions of the state, there is a huge service defects or delivery defects there, which forces citizens to look for private solutions. That's what I meant to say when, we are opting out kind of thing.
Yeah. So obviously this is something that only some citizens are capable of doing, right? So like you said, it's only with rising income levels that this option arises in the first place. The other point that you make connected to this, your central point is that instead of seeking these sort of private solutions, what we should do is engage in active citizenship. Mm-hmm. What do you mean by active citizenship?
Active citizenship is when all of us actually, as citizens, participate in the daily affairs. But that is not possible in a modern democracy, which is why we have representatives. But the latest definition of, latest or updated definition of active citizenship comes from Stacey Abrams' campaign, or, Stacey Abrams is this lady who ran the Democratic campaign in Georgia. Georgia was a red state. She's credited with having turned it to the blue in the recent elections. And she did this through active citizenship, through her foundation, of course. But active citizenship actually means, is premised on encouraging citizens to use their agency to make claims on the state. So claims on the state is one of the important pillars of democracy, the other two being electoral participation and, protests or resistance, as we call it. Now, we do fairly well in terms of electoral participation because we think that is the one time we actually, show our agreement or disagreement with the government. Protests are also fairly common, but making claims on the state, like we discussed earlier, is not widespread, or we don't do a great job. As citizens, we don't do a great job of that. What this active citizenship actually did was, in the US, was make people aware. It's a very evolved form of awareness campaign of, voter suppression, their rights as voters and voter suppression. Considering the demographics of Georgia is majority black, and still you had a Republican thing, means there was a lot of voter suppression and stuff like that. But she used, her campaign used things like, agency to make people aware of their rights. And also, you just can't do it single-handedly. You need representatives on the ground. You need to build a movement around that and make them aware. So active citizenship is premised on the three things of: one, a value framework; two, representatives who will carry your message; and three, of course, technology, which will help the representatives carry the message. So that is the summary of active citizenship. So we can take a lot of lessons from there onto our, local governance or local citizenship issues here.
Yeah, but what you've given us is a great example of, it's essentially of political mobilization, right? You're raising awareness, but you're doing it for a specific partisan cause. What if, such active citizenship is used, or for a specific purpose, for a narrow political goal at the local level? What if there are two different visions of what should be done in a city? How will active citizenship really solve that problem? I suppose in a broader sense, what I'm asking is, are there problems like this that might arise with active citizenship? And, are there other unanticipated consequences?
Yeah, I would think that even vigilantism may come up as an unintended consequence of, active citizenship. That the thing that Ambedkar was always against, because he was against this Gandhi's vision of the village economy or whatever. That is a danger of having, very active citizens groups, as we may call it. But we can't take away from the fact that unless citizens are involved, unless citizens make claims on the state in terms of, say, water, education, electricity, whatever, you define the minimum that you want the state to deliver to you, and you make claims on that. So unless citizens are aware enough to make the claims, now there is resignation, or we have internalized the failure of the state to actually deliver to us, right? So that internalization needs to go, and we need to internalize the fact that we are actually paying double. It's like a double whammy. We are paying taxes, but yet we buy water. We are paying taxes, yet electricity and everything else is missing in our thing. So, we need to educate or make citizens aware that this is a double whammy for them, and they need to make claims on the state. Only when we make claims on the state, the demand side of that will increase, and probably our representatives will have to respond to those issues rather than bring up, other issues which have more substantive value.
Right. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. So even though this can come with downsides, the broad upside is that it at least forces some focus on issues that plague our cities. But Suman, people will also point out that, there are other more fundamental structural problems with urban governance, right?
True.
Cities don't have autonomy. They don't really have much control on their own budgets. So wouldn't that also require activism of a similar kind at the state and general level?
Yes, I would think that firstly, the MP local area development scheme, I think that is a huge fraud on the federal structure itself of the government. Even if you don't want to call it a huge fraud, it's a slight. Because the MP, as a member of the parliament, as his job description, his or her job description would say, is not involved in civic issues, does not have a say in civic issues. The MP has his or her say in lawmaking frameworks or any of that. the devolution of funds needs to come from the center to the state to the local governments. If you bypass that and you give the MP a fund, then you're undermining the local governance. And, a lot of times people just go to the MLA or go to the MP to solve their civic. Maybe it's a short-term fix for whatever, but as a structure, as a framework, it defeats the purpose of local government. So I think that we need to rethink that, even if you don't want to remove that completely.
Suman, you mentioned how certain things like electricity, water are public goods and therefore must be provided by the local government. But I just wanted to... So we know the city of Jamshedpur, only large city in India that does not have a municipal corporation. And in 2018, there was a petition filed in the Supreme Court asking for an establishment of a municipal corporation, but that did not happen. And it is controlled by a privately owned entity under Tata Steel that manages the entire city. And to people that have been to Jamshedpur, like I have been, it seems a very ideal city in many respects. So do you think that is a good alternative? Why can't certain things be privatized? Because Jamshedpur is a significantly large city with a lot of people. And we know that the major problem with municipal government in India has been the lack of fiscal federalism, right? Because they don't have money to implement the changes that we want them to. And therefore, if you privatize this and then there is the profit motive driving something, then automatically things become much more smoothly functioning and they become much more efficient. So do you think that is a good alternative?
See, firstly, I don't think the free market economists would agree to electricity and water being public goods as such, because there is there's no market failure there. But the state has been mandated to provide certain things because where there is a market failure, because a private player is not going to supply electricity to the farthest corners. You need the state to be there, right? So Jamshedpur, again, the Tatas probably, it's a fabulous way to govern a city or whatever. They've done a great job with Jamshedpur. Firstly, we need to ask the question, is it a private corporation's mandate to actually do these governance things? Will they do it everywhere? Will the Tatas pick up anywhere to do these things? There is no incentive to do it in all places, So I think governance or local governance as such, we need to go back to the definition of where the government should be. And so it goes back to, again, monopoly over violence. Because the state has monopoly of violence, they need to keep the state secure, enforcement of contracts, and, provision of public goods, which the market will not provide for. Now, if you give everything to the market, then you are bound to have issues of, equity, efficiency, all those things, and therefore may not be able to service the entire. So I'm not sure that is a scalable model too for the corporates, since they're not in that business.
Yes, they're not currently in the business because we have given it to the government. But the way I was thinking about it is that, yes, there might be problems with equity in the face value, but on the face of it. But if we were to think about it for long enough, I'm sure there can be proper incentives as to why a private company would like to invest in the management of a city, because there is profit to be made, right? There is profit to be made in especially the electricity sector in India, because currently we see how woeful the entire sector is. We have power cuts ranging over hours. There has been a ATP episode on it previously. We'll link it in the show notes. So I think that especially has a major potential for private investment and for private control. Similarly, I think a lot of problems with water that we have, if they were better.
Yeah, see, it's the pricing of the goods. Also, the subsidies come into play, right? What the government charges us. Is there a way to segment all customers, all your citizens, into paying, non-paying, subsidized, how much you'll charge whom? Unless you figure that out, how will you have this whole thing about having a market rate for customers. So it's the pricing of the good that will determine whether the government should get involved.
Right. Yeah, I think that is the biggest argument against this, because if the local governments had the funds that we wanted them to have, then the argument could be made that they could subsidize it for poorer populations. Therefore, even if it's expensive, the ones that can afford it would go ahead, while for the others it could be subsidized by the government, but the management is done by a private company. But because the funds are the big issue, I don't see how that is feasible. But the reason I brought this up was there are also problems with the concept of active citizenship, right? Because just looking at America, for example, the fact that people are more involved in the system is great for many things, but it's also not so good for some other things, right? Because for example, in America, the fact that people are so aware of their rights and are so active in the political discourse can also be said to be the reason why there was the entire protest against wearing masks, why so many people are anti-vaxxers, right? So often collective wisdom might not be the right thing. And especially on a local level which is the most important level through which you can actually communicate with the government, where you can get involved. Are we sure that we can trust the collective wisdom every time? Because it's often misdirected, right?
Yeah, collective wisdom within the framework of the Constitution, right? Anything that is against the Constitution can always be challenged. You need to give a broad framework and then allow for local solutions to local problems. If you have a top-down approach to everything, then that is also not going to work. So as long as we have a framework, I still think local governance will work.
Yes, of course. But the thing is, with the Constitution does not say how much you should price your electricity at, right? And we can debate about the constitutional values and the constitutional framework. But the fact that the amount of... So the very fact that there is a lack of fiscal federalism, how does that get solved with people getting more involved in the system?
See, if people knew that, I'm sure people know, but if people are more aware of the fact or are more aggressive about ensuring that local governments get more money or start a campaign on that, then it will flow. We have to make it flow into the political narrative, into everything that feeds the electoral system. Only then, and then somebody comes, again, expanding the Overton window or whatever you call it. Right now, there does not seem to be room for anyone to say that local governments can do a better job than a mandate by the central government. Right? There could be inefficiencies within the local governments. That's not, I'm not debating that, but I'm saying people need to buy into the idea, or people need to be really wedded to the idea that the local problems are going to be solved by local solutions and local funds, functions, and functionaries. Right? What has been granted for the autonomy of local governments. So if that gets fed into the electoral narratives, electoral promises, etc., probably we can make some kind of change towards that.
So if that were to happen, then there will be more reforms that are needed also, right? Because the reason why I think the American model works the way it does in governance is that everything is based around a city. So a city has its own police force, for example.
Yeah, has its own police force, education. You see people so involved in the local school board, because education is, whatever, your public schools. All parents are involved in some form or the other. We don't see that here. That's again because we have found private students to them, where we think the school will take care of everything, and we don't seem to be as involved in school governance.
Yeah, so this is where exactly I wanted the collective wisdom thing to come in, because when you get involved on a local level, doesn't that also make the entire system more ripe for lobbying and for people with more wealth to decide what is correct? Because when it is on a central level, and there are only certain things that you can influence. That is separate from when it's on a local level and the everyday existence of a person through, maybe electricity or water is influenced because a certain person has an inadequate amount, like a disproportionate amount of wealth, and other people just cannot do anything but be influenced by it. And that has happened in America in the past, in many cities where...
It's true. But again, but America is also, I don't know if we can draw like direct parallels with America, because their entire system of, they have here, their neighborhoods are defined by income, whereas we have fairly mixed neighborhoods everywhere, right? So your school also is defined by the neighborhood and all that. So it's a little, while they can be modeled, but I don't know how relevant it will be to us. We need a framework, and within that, you should give autonomy to local governments to find hyperlocal solutions.
Suman, sometimes hyperlocal solutions have occasionally been tried. I can think most obviously of Delhi, where the idea was floated of having referendums for local issues, though that was never quite implemented. Again, I'll ask you, are there any downsides that you see to trying to implement these type of hyperlocal solutions, to involving the local population in, regular matters of governance?
Yeah, the absence of expertise on, sometimes it's not always the numbers, the game that will work, right? Sometimes you have to trust the experts, and the experts' view may not be the commonsensical or the simplistic view, and that all people will take on any issue. So if you go by purely local solutions or involving everybody into the thing, then you could have those issues, right? Everything, it would become a majoritarian thing, whatever. So again, my thing is, it has to be a broader framework, and within that, as much autonomy as local conditions or local ecosystems can allow for.
It does definitely bring up some dilemmas, and yet it's also interesting, right? It's amazing that we can begin by talking about urban governance, and we really end up grappling with so many of the most profound issues in politics. The question, the role of democracy, of citizens, of representatives, and so on. Thank you so much for joining us on All Things Policy, Suman. We really hope to have you back on the podcast very soon again.
Thank you. My pleasure entirely. Thanks.
And thank you also, Atish, and thank you for joining us on All Things Policy.
Please consider signing up for Takshashila's courses. Applications are now open, and you can apply at www.takshashila.org.in/courses. If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Once again, just a quick reminder, please do help us out by filling out our survey. It's at ivmpodcast.com/survey. It really does help us figure out who's listening and, what are the characteristics that we can go and push to advertisers. That is massively helpful to us. Please, please, please do help out with that. So, on the network this week, let me start with a quick milestone. It's the 100th episode of Begin the Journey with Ashish Vidyarthi. Congratulations to Ashish and the team. Great show. If you're not listening to it, he talks to you about just how to approach life. It's just very, very cool stuff. Do check this out. Want to mention the note with Maruk Inayat. She talks about why petrol prices are so high. On the Wired Talk, Siddharth speaks with Harsh Mandar On Advertising is Dead, Varun speaks to Kabir Biswas, the founder of Dunzo. They have a really interesting conversation about, what's the future of Dunzo and what they're thinking about. On the Traveling Professor's Diaries, check out Siddharth talk about the performance paradox. I found it really fascinating and interesting. I think that you guys will really get something out of listening to that. Please do give that a listen. And finally, let me mention Zindagi Diaries. It's Ragini Kumar's poetry podcast. The first week when it came out, we put out 5 poems first week. We put out another 5 poems this week, and the response has been phenomenal. Do check it out. It's in Hindi. It's a poetry podcast. Something a little different. Do give it a shot and let us know what you think. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
Come learn and experience the ABCDs of being queer with me, Shunetro,
and me, Farhad,
on our show, Gay BCD.
The two of us take you through our stories and experiences of being gay men in the city of Mumbai and have candid
and sometimes downright scandalous
conversations about sexuality, gay culture, and everything in between.
Catch new episodes of Gay BCD every Tuesday on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get all your podcasts from.